오늘 발제의 첫 문을 열어주실 필립 고모님을 무대 위로 모시겠습니다. 여러분 큰 박수로 맞이해 주시기 바랍니다. 네, 필립 고모님은 지난 2006년부터 영국의 대표적인 한국문학 온라인 아카이브인 런던 코리아 링크를 개설해 운영해 오고 계십니다. 특히 한국 도서 데이터베이스를 구축하고 다양한 비평을 기록하면서 현지의 우리 문학을 활발하게 소개해 오고 계십니다. 또한 2020년에는 한국문학 번역을 집중적으로 다룬 학술지 트랜슬레이션 리뷰의 특별판 작업에도 참여하신 영국을 기반으로 활동하는 전문 비평가이자 큐레이터이십니다. 오늘 이 자리에서는 절망, 공감, 과감함, 인간미, 비주류에서 벗어난 한국문학이라는 제목으로 해외 현지에서 오랜 시간 직접 지켜보고 기록해온 경험을 바탕으로 세계 무대에서 우리 소설이 어떻게 소개되고 수용되고 있는지 이야기를 나누어 주실 예정입니다. 그럼 필립 고모님께 마이크를 넘기겠습니다. 다시 한번 따뜻한 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.
Thank you very much for that warm introduction. It's a great honor to be here to present about how Korean literature has been received in English-speaking countries, particularly England. I had a little debate with the organizers how I should be introduced. We settled on journalist. I am actually an early victim of the Hallyu. Round about 2000, I was hooked on Korean films, which got me interested in Korean culture more broadly. That led me to start consuming Korean literature to understand a little bit more about Korea, as I think a lot of people are now doing as they discover Korea through the second and third and fourth wave of Hallyu. So a victim, a consumer, and also an observer. In the 25 years that I've been following Korean culture, I've been following how the popularity of Korean culture has increased in the UK. And as part of that observation process, I started my website back in 2006. And that website has been tracking literature publications, Korean events in London, and is a resource for how the Hallyu is spreading, at least in England. So my brief as part of this talk is to talk about how Korean literature is received in English-speaking countries and what people find compelling. And for me, that's quite a tough brief because everyone is different. Everyone will find something different in a book. To take an example, I love the works of Han Kang, some of them. I love Human Acts. It's one of my top 5 Korean novels. I find The Vegetarian compelling. When it comes to The White Book, I've tried twice to get beyond about page 25, and I've never got beyond page 25, I'm ashamed to say. But what's happening here? This is a photograph I took at the London premiere of The White Book. It's a new composition by an English composer. She's standing on the left in that rather fancy trouser suit. In the wonderful white gown there is Barbara Hannigan, the soprano. And that performance took place in the Barbican with the London Symphony Orchestra earlier on this year. And let me read a little bit from the program note to explain a little bit behind that performance. And as I say, this is from the program notes of that concert. In 2019, composer Laura Bowler came across Han Kang's White Book and was reading it while her mother was in hospital being treated for acute myeloid leukemia. The book reflected a lot of what I was feeling at the time, says Bowler, and it was a great comfort in some ways. I didn't feel as lonely when I was reading it. So here is the White Book resonating, one of the key words of this conference, resonating with someone from a completely different culture. And the soprano who performed the work said, "It's like turning your soul inside out." So that work set to music about 5 or 6 chapters of Deborah Smith's translation of the White Book to music for soprano and orchestra. Another quote about the White Book. As part of the preparation for this talk, I launched a survey onto the internet to see how people have responded to Korean literature. And one of the responses I got back was this story. About 5 years ago, I picked up a copy of the White Book in Daunt Bookshop, one of my favorites, and thought, what is this? And then Hangang became a key to Korean literature for me. Other titles followed, We Do Not Part. I read some other Korean novels. I went to Korea 2 years ago and spent several days in Gwangju to find out the background to Human Acts. I was engaged to the point that a passing reference to the novel to Unjusa took me into the countryside to a site where many early Buddhist statues were carved. So here is someone who randomly came across the White Book. It was his first book of Korean literature, and it took him on a cultural journey to Hwasungun, just outside Gwangju. So here we have an example of 2 completely different people who aren't really connected with Korean literature to start with, who had taken on a cultural journey by a book that I couldn't get beyond 25 pages of, I'm ashamed to say. So I don't think I'm a representative follower or reader of Korean literature, but during this talk, I will try to give some of my own observations from my own personal experience. I've also drawn upon the responses to the survey. I've also done a couple of interviews with people for background, and I've looked at a few press articles. Let me start with a slideshow. This is what you see, or what you did see in the middle of March, in London's most famous bookstore, Foyles in Charing Cross Road. Literally, you come in the front door, this is what you see. And I'm going to zoom in on that first table. It is We Do Not Part. So the most prestigious bookshop in London, the first books you come to at this time in March was We Do Not Part. It was, of course, the month when We Do Not Part came out in paperback, so big boost in sales. And it was also the month in which Light and Thread came out in translation in England. So a big push, popularity for Hangang that particular month. So We Do Not Part was book of the month in this particular book. And actually they took the opportunity to sell the original Korean language version alongside it. So that was for a period of a couple of weeks in London's most famous bookstore. And in the window, what have we got? We've got a slightly more popular novel, Holy Boy by Lee Hee-ju. So prominently placed in the shop window, alongside some English language books or English authors, and also 3 or 4 Japanese translations there as well. So that's London's probably biggest bookshop. And as another example, this is my local bookstore, which I think is probably smaller than the Hyunandong bookshop of Hwangborum. But you'll see I've circled, top right, there is Hangang's We Do Not Part, and bottom left, Chun Sunran, 1,000 Blues. And this is their recommended fiction titles for the month. And again, this was in March. I have to remind myself that these are mainstream bookshops dealing in mainstream literature. It's not a specialist bookstore. It's a bookstore, both of them bookstore, which promote quality literature. On the way to Korea last time, I wondered what the bookstore in the airport would look like, because often in airport bookshops you don't get a lot of quality literature. However, we have 2 Korean titles, one of which is translated from the Korean, Mrs. Shima's A Killer by Kang Ji-young, and next to it, Honey in the Wound by Han Ji-young, which is an English language title. And one thing that we find nowadays in bookshops in London, that there's no distinction between translated literature and original English literature. They're all on the same table together. So you will find a Korean table maybe in some bookshops where it will have English language and translated titles. So that's just a sample of bookstores. And this is just a huge change from 20 years ago when I started trying to find Korean literature in London. At that time, all I could find were 2 or 3 titles tucked away at the back of a shop. And actually, the place I used to go was Daunt Bookshop, which was mentioned in the second quote of, which sorts books by country. And at that time, there were, as I say, 2 or 3 books, including Lee Mun-yeol, the poet, Chae Man-sik, Peace Under Heaven. They hard to find, tucked away at the bottom of the bookshop. But since then, where's my pointer? Is a little graph of books published containing translations of Korean prose fiction. And it's a little bit noisy, lots of peaks and troughs, but the key thing is the bottom solid blue, or is it purple? I can't really see in this light, line area, which shows a huge amount of growth in the last 15 years. There are other peaks. A lot of those are publications which aren't readily available in bookshops. Many of you might remember the Asia Publishers series of small short stories, and round about 2014, there are over 100 of those published. So that accounts for the big peak in the middle. But the books that you find in bookshops in England, by publication date, it's that bottom dark blue area. So you can see there's a huge increase in the past 15 years. Similarly, a growth in the number of translators that have been involved in these publications from the early days, where really there was a handful of people who are active, to now when there are just so many more. More translators, better translations. And the books that we find on the tables now, they feel as if they were written in English, whereas previously, maybe it felt they were a little bit clunky. Attitudes to literature, translated literature, have been changing. Here is a very interesting quote which really resonates with me. It's a quote which was given by a translator who works from Spanish into English. Our generation, born in the 1960s, suffered from the notion that translated fiction was like castor oil. Not very pleasant, but probably good for you. It shouldn't be good or bad for you, or anything else. What people are looking for is to engage with the book. And certainly that was my experience when I started out reading Korean literature. It did feel a bit like castor oil. As I said earlier, part of the problem was the not terribly smooth translations in some cases, and the books didn't look appealing. They weren't nice glossy cover art. The cover artwork was a bit uninspired. So that was one of the things which maybe would put people off. There's been a lot of change since then, and a lot of it has been due, of course, to the work of LTI KOREA, encouraging the new wave of translators, but also, of course, the prizes have helped. And in the context of Please Look After Mother, Shin Kyung-suk, and The Vegetarian, people suddenly woke up to translated literature. There's an element of people wanting to read things that are pushing the boundaries, said one TikTok influencer. And then we all know the name Anton Ha. His quote, after The Vegetarian won the International Booker Prize, I think this is a great quote, all of a sudden, Korean literature was seen as edgy and fierce, and emerging translators like me took note. Maybe there was a readership for queer Korean literature or even Korean speculative fiction, as The Vegetarian had many elements of queerness and weird fiction and fantasy. Maybe the readership for translated fiction was less conservative than we thought. Much less conservative, in fact. If the Anglosphere was ready for this book, what other surprises could they be delighted by? So translated literature seen as filling a gap that's not been met by English language fiction, and the recognition that there's the scope for translating more genres. And all of that has been fulfilled, I think, since those quotes. One of the causes of this growth, of course, is, as I said earlier, the work of LTI KOREA, the work of the 3% Club in America, who noted the lack of translated fiction in bookshops. And of course, there are people such as the literary agents, including Barbara Zitwa, who has been one of the champions of Korean literature. And I spoke to her in preparation for this talk. And one of the things she said is, I positioned and promoted the books as great world literature, not as niche books, not as books in translation, but as great world literature. So bringing the books out from the niche at the back of the shop to the front of the shop. And this appetite for translated literature hasn't just been in relation to Korean literature. We saw earlier on those Japanese titles in the window. But part of the reason for this, the audience, the readership is now a lot more globally connected than before, and people want to hear about stories from the countries that they're interested in. I spoke to the person in charge of translated literature at Foyle's bookshop for this talk, and this is a transcript of the conversation we had, a little element of the conversation, and he has noted a direct relationship between the interest in Korean fiction in his bookshop and the emergence of the Hallyu, whichever wave of Hallyu we're talking about, and I guess we're talking about post-Psy and Gangnam Style, BTS and K-beauty, all that sort, in the last 10 years. And he said, since Hallyu started, there is now a consistent fan base for Korean literature. They can't wait for the next one, and the next one, and the next one. So we have people actually asking us when this one's coming out. They already know the book is successful in Korea. They want it to be translated and published in the UK. They're very in the world, mostly online, and they follow the BTS reads list on Goodreads, and they follow BookTok. So a much younger readership, enthusiasm arising from Hallyu, which has done a great deal to generate the interest and enthusiasm. One of the features also that has struck me while observing the emergence of Korean literature over the past 25 years is the expansion in genres. When Korea was the guest of honor at the London Book Fair in 2014, there was a huge amount of enthusiasm about the quality of the literature that was on show there. But there were also conversations around the water cooler and the coffee bars saying, where's the Korean detective fiction? Where's Korean crime? Most of the literary fiction on offer at the time was to do with historical trauma, history, And there was a lot of questions around where are the other genres? And of course, that question has been answered since 2014 with, let's call it K-crime, K-thrillers. We've had sci-fi. And one of the things I've been enjoying is the slightly more offbeat, quirky fiction which has been coming out. Also, we can't talk about genres without talking about healing fiction, which of course is a massive genre at the moment. This photo I took from a Facebook group, which is Asian Book Lovers Club, and it's a shop in Singapore. And you'll see, if you could zoom in, all those are Korean or Japanese novels in the healing fiction genre. Hugely popular genre, which does divide opinions. I've got a couple of quotes from the survey that I did, and on balance, people were really enthusiastic about healing fiction. Healing fiction is what I enjoy the most, says one respondent. But against that, there was one person who said, I try to read as much as possible, but these days I tend to skip healing fiction titles. I dislike them. It's too predictable. When I start reading a book, I know what's going to happen. Cats meow, cherry blossoms flutter. People have hardships, but overcome them when they go to a bookshop or library. So that was a slightly more downbeat assessment of healing fiction, which some of you might agree with. I think there are good things that come out of healing fiction. I think it's very interesting that it is a genre that has emerged and people enjoy it. So I just wanted to share a couple of things about what actually is selling at the moment. Here we've got the top 20 list of translated fiction titles in Waterstones, which is the biggest chain of quality bookshops in the UK. And this was a snapshot taken in March, and I've highlighted the Korean titles. We Do Not Part is the top seller of the Koreans, which is about number 9. Then The Vegetarian, and then The Holy Boy, which you'll remember was in the window. You will also notice Japan, Sweden, Japan, Norway, Japan. You get the picture. Korea has a lot of competition. In terms of translated fiction, Japan is number 1 in the UK. And what surprises me and delights me is that Korea is number 2. So that is really exciting. So what is it that draws people to Korean fiction? And now you will understand the strange title of my talk, which was Bleak, Relatable, Daring, Humane, a seemingly random collection of adjectives. I asked people filling out the survey to give me 3 words which summed up Korean literature for them. And here are some of the answers. So someone wrote intense, dark, and bleak. So maybe that's The Vegetarian, or maybe it's The Plotters. We've got broad, daring, contemplative, relatable, thought-provoking, stunning. Anyway, I won't read it all out, but those are some of the adjectives that were used, and a huge range of adjectives there, which brings me back to my opening problem. You know, what do people find appealing about Korean literature? Well, you're going to get so many answers to that question, as many people who are asked that question. But I thought it was rather a fun question to ask. But I think there are a few themes coming out there. Yes, the intensity, but also the depth, the emotional depth, and the approachability of Korean literature. And let me try to pull together some other thoughts around the appeal of Korean literature. And I've based this collection of bullet points on conversations that I've had with people in the pub, in the coffee shop, and also I've based it on the responses to the survey. So what is the appeal of Korean literature? Well, one of the things, obviously, is that Korea is now cool because of Hallyu. That is quite clear from the conversation I had with Foyle's bookshop. They clearly think that Hallyu has had an effect on the reading public. There's a desire for something different from the typical English language novel, and that was a theme that was brought out by the book talker. And this is this third bullet was something I lifted out of the survey responses that I did, but I think it really resonates with me. It's the trauma, it's the history, it's the weight of collective memory, it's understanding some of the history where Korea has come from to where it is now. That is something that really appeals to many readers. I won't say all readers, but many readers. And so in that category of trauma and history, I think you would probably put Han Kang to a certain extent, Hwang Sok-yong and Shin Kyung-suk as some of the representative authors. One theme that came to me as a bit of a surprise when talking to a couple of people is that within some of the novels which have been translated, there's a really unusual and exciting and different narrative perspective. Who is the narrator of a particular story? So we have in Kim Myung-ha's Diary of a Murderer, we have a narrator who is suffering from dementia and losing his memory. So we've got a story told from that unusual perspective. A really unusual short story with an interesting perspective, Kim Mei-ran's The Future of Silence, which is narrated by a near-extinct language, which is such an unusual idea. And then within the novels of Jung Yoo-jung, we have the upcoming Bonobo, which I think in Korean is Jini. We have a comatose woman who is inhabiting a bonobo. And in another Jung Yoo-jung, we've got a murderer who doesn't realize he's a murderer, and the story uncovers how the mother gets killed. I think one genre or theme which has come about in the last 5 years, which has really excited me, is the quirky, offbeat, different, weird, a range of adjectives which you could use, amongst which I would say Chung Bora, Cursed Bunny, and that opening story about that head coming out of the toilet, which is just so weird and original. The wonderful stories of Yoon Ko-eun, Min Dol-ki, and Walking Practice. All of those genres and themes, which I don't think anyone could have predicted at the time of the London Book Fair, when they were thinking, oh, Korean literature is all trauma and history and division. Finally, I think an area, a theme in Korean literature which people find really appealing and interesting is the critique of societal issues from a Korean perspective. So here I would put novels such as Kim Ji-young, born 1982, and Cho Nam-ju's short stories on a similar theme, LGBT stories, the pressures of Korean society, Hell Joseon, those sorts of themes. It's helping people to think more about what's going on in Korea, what is the Korean experience. Every countries have challenges with equality, women's issues, family issues, poverty, inclusion, and it's really interesting to a readership to see how Korea experiences those issues. Now I can see my time is almost coming to an end, so I'm going to start wrapping up with trying to pull together some of the recent trends. The most obvious thing is the much greater availability of translations in mainstream bookshops, not specialist bookshops, and even in airport bookshops, which I was really surprised at. So we can say that Korean literature has emerged from the niche, at least in London. We can see that there's a hugely increased appetite from the readership due to Hallyu and the huge increase in the presence of Korean stuff that's happening on television, in the high streets. You see Korean street food shops, Korean beauty shops increasingly in London, and that has driven an appetite in the readership. What's also happened is the increase in the genres available since the London Book Fair: speculative fiction, thrillers, healing fiction. But of course, historical fiction, literary fiction still continues to be strongly represented, which is great. We've seen books addressing societal, current, universal issues as a common theme. And actually, one thing which puzzled me when I started my journey in Korean literature was the prevalence, the ubiquity of the short story and the fact that there weren't so many novels around. But now, I think people are becoming to welcome and enthusiastically receive the current batch of short stories that we're getting. I come back to Cursed Bunny, Young Cohen's Table for One, Lee Yori's Broccoli Punch, Cheon Young's Shoko's Smile. Wonderful collection of short stories which are really exciting and different and engaging. What we're also seeing is a hugely faster turnaround from the Korean publishing date of a novel or a short story to the English publication date. Hugely accelerated turnaround in translations, and that's really exciting. And one final point, which is a downside, is it not? There is so much there, you can't read it all. It's wonderful, actually, to have the choice. Until the last couple of years, I have been trying to read just about everything which is published in English in relation to Korean literature in translation. The last couple of years, it's been impossible. And that's great, actually, because it means there's choice. You don't have to, if you're not into healing fiction, you don't have to read your healing fiction. You can read other stuff. You can choose your thriller, or you can choose your LGBT fiction. So I think that's a really positive story to tell, that actually there's more than you can read. Because obviously you wouldn't be able to, in England, you wouldn't be able to read every single novel that is published in English. That's a ridiculous prospect. So I'm going to wrap up now, and with one final quote, which is extracted from the questionnaire that people kindly filled in for me. And I'm going to read it quite slowly. The final quote is, "If I were to ask what most draws me to Korean literature, I'd say that it's the combination of captivating storytelling, emotional depth, and history. Korean literature stands out to me because it seems to carry both the beauty of storytelling and the weight of history so powerfully. And that makes it especially meaningful to me." Thank you very much.
감사합니다. 네, 깊이 있는 발표 너무 감사드립니다. 지금 더 이상 한국문학의 비주류가 아니다 이걸 말씀을 해주시고 그다음에 좀 독자 관련된 여러 자료들을 막 다 모아서 한국 독자가 얼마나 다양한가 이런 것들을 확인할 수 있는 시간을 마련해 주셨는데요. 예. 네, 여기에서 이 세션은 좀 마무리를 해야 될 것 같은데요. 발표해 주신 선생님께 너무 감사드리고 다시 한번 큰 박수 부탁드립니다.